Welcome to this week's edition of Kaleidoscope, the last program in this current series. For you tonight, we're going to unleash the varied talents of the front lawn on the unsuspecting airwaves. However, we begin this evening with a profile of painter Evelyn Page. 70 years of one artist's achievement is remarkable in anybody's language, and an exhibition currently touring New Zealand pays tribute to such an individual. Evelyn Page is one of this country's leading colorists, and one of only a few women to choose the nude female as a subject. The Robert McDougall Art Gallery in Christchurch has put together the 7 Decades exhibition, a chance to enjoy the richness and vitality of a lifetime's work. In conversation with Liz Grant, Evelyn Page explains how her passion for painting was there at a very early age.
And both my sisters painted too, and they were adult when I was born. And so I used to watch them painting at home, and I used to pine to use the oil color. Oh, if only I could have got at that oil color and that palette with those brushes and done something on the canvas. But I was never allowed to use oil color. And I was never allowed to touch my sister's paint either. My elder sister was very possessive. No, I wasn't to touch her paints. So I was given watercolors to paint with, and watercolor sketchbooks. And I used to fill these up, you know, at an uncanny rate. And I was always demanding more sketchbooks. And that was how I started painting, even before I went to the School of Art.
The young Eve Polson's enthusiasm couldn't be ignored, neither could the talent that went with it. A remarkably competent self-portrait was done when she was only 17, and only a year after she had started attending the Canterbury College School of Art in 1915. On entry there, she was allowed to attend the life classes from the start, bypassing the usual preparatory courses. The School of Art was a colonial version of the Royal Academy College of Art, and in essence, what it offered was a thorough grounding in basic skills. Those academic techniques are very much in evidence in the portrait of Eve's father. Largely successful, it was nevertheless criticized for a failure to realize the relationship of the hand and book to the reflections in the tabletop. Not a problem to be found in this study of flowers from her much-loved garden at Waikanae. Indeed, Eve's formative training was influential, but it provided only limited stimulation for the more experimental and creative artist. Endless charcoal studies of plaster-cast Greek heroes were fairly stultifying.
No, it gave me something to rebel against, and probably was very important on that count, I think now.
The accepted practice of the college was to paint a figure from a studio model and then paint in an imagined background. Eve's first placement of a figure out of doors breaks with that convention. Lincoln Kern was the father of her friend Dorothy, whom she'd met through a mutual music teacher. In 1929 and 30, Eve Polson painted 2 works that show a move towards what were to become 2 of her major preoccupations, colour and the nude female form. They show a progression in her technique with figures in a landscape and her early experimentation of light on flesh. Neil Roberts, who curated the exhibition, sees the nude studies as having a special significance.
The nude subject element is important because very, very few artists of her generation developed that subject matter beyond really just the academic studio study.
Oh, well, I paint nudes a lot because I love running downs and tumbling hills. And and things like that for subjects, and contours, things with contours, definite contours.
One study in particular had a certain magic for Eve.
It's the painting that's come most easily to life, because sometimes I'm really not quite sure how the painting's got on the canvas, and that painting is one of them. It posed some problems that I used to stew over at night, in the middle of the night, in bed, and then have another go in the morning. I wonder how it sort of did what I wanted, but it did. And finally it came to life in about 5 or 6 goes. And that was the easiest painting that I have ever done.
In 1985, Eve painted her last nude at the age of 86. Half a century earlier, she'd held her first solo exhibition in the Christchurch Art Gallery. Her friends bought all her work, and the £300 raised made her first trip to Europe possible in January 1937.
Oh, that was shattering. It was absolutely shattering. And I used to go to the Tate and sit, for days in front of his portrait of Joseph Hone and absorb it. And in another way, I did that later on with Kokoschka, his portrait of the French philosopher, I can't think of his name, which is absolutely wonderful, I think, amongst the portraits that have been painted in this century. Or was it the end of last? No, it would be the end of last century. Yes, that was something that moved me terrifically, and something that freed me up a bit from the charcoal photographic setup that I'd been through, and that had lasted for 7 years. Believe it or not, it's a long time. 7 years to be drawing from the antique. But however, it gave me, it really did free me up a little from that. So I was able to form my own ideas more freely over portraits from then on. And that was exciting.
She joined Frederick Page in England, and perhaps their closest friendship of that time was with Charles Brash. He wrote in his memoirs,
I was sitting for her now, many long sessions. Every quarter hour or so I was allowed to get up, stretch cramped limbs, and eat some of the delectable chocolate fudge Eve made to bribe me. Fred would sometimes play while Eve painted. The portrait was gloomily like me.
And he really was a very painterly subject, I must say. He'd come back from a dig somewhere in or one of the islands in the Mediterranean. And he was baked, lovely dark mahogany brown with his lovely blue flashing eyes. Oh, it was wonderful.
Her remarkable empathy for the very different characters of her subjects comes through in her portraits.
Most of them people I know very well. And I've sat through the years talking with them. And as I said before, absorbing them. And this comes out naturally.
The portrait of Vaughan Williams was done with only 5 sittings. No bribes of fudge this time, but with Freddie again playing the piano and chatting with the composer. Freddie himself was the subject of a number of portraits. Theirs was a remarkable relationship, not only for what they gave each other, but for what they gave their friends. Freddie died in 1983.
But of course my life has been chopped completely off. I mean, I miss it. I miss what I've had so much. It's been terrible to make the adjustment.
But to happier times when in 1938 they returned to New Zealand and a friend took them round Lyttelton Harbour looking for a house.
So he took us all to the newest, most awful little bungs that have been built around Lyttelton Harbour. And they were all so small that we couldn't possibly get the piano in. And so we said to Tom, look, we can't get the piano to any of these houses you've shown us. Isn't there an old house that we could have a look at? And he said, well, it's only old Waitahuna, and you wouldn't want to go there. And we asked, why not? Oh, someone had hung himself in the stables halfway down the drive and has left its aura on the place. So we said, well, take us down and show us, which he did. And we got into this beautiful place, and we couldn't believe it. Not one of the five of us, and as he opened the back door and we went in to have a look at the house, the stench of mice and rat was so appalling, nearly floored us. But nevertheless, we could see the possibilities of the place. We walked through, and there was this wonderful view from the front passage across a great big lawn in the harbour, and the house itself was the best of early colonial New Zealand. It was beautiful. And we said, oh, we'll have it. We love it. He thought we were quite mad.
In 1940, Ernst Plischke, the Viennese refugee architect, visited Waitahuna. He thought it was wonderful, and in thanks for the Pages' hospitality, he sent Eve a gift.
He sent over a reproduction of one of Bonnard's paintings because it made him think a little bit of my painting. And of course I was thrilled over this. I looked at this reproduction, I looked and looked and looked and absorbed it to such a degree that, it's a wonder that it remained intact at all. But there was everything put down in such freedom. It was an eye-opener for me.
Eve came to see herself less and less as a landscape painter. It wasn't the scene that captured her interest, but the movement and people within the landscape.
Well, I demanded humanity and something connected with humanity, and unconsciously I did this in everything I did. I mean, whether it was apples on a plate and a knife and an apple half peeled. And cityscapes were the same. I mean, whether people were on foot or on bicycles or on tram cars. Tram cars were marvelous to paint with people in, or any other way. It didn't matter. I mean, as long as they were there. And usually they were in strangely enough, rather organized groups, I found. Even people walking along the sidewalk, almost as though I'd arranged them.
Another feature of Evelyn Page's work is her use of colour, bringing a notable vibrancy to her paintings. The traditionally tonal qualities of Canterbury painting in her days at art school have long been left behind. Her work has remained largely unaffected by movements in modern art. For that, she has her detractors. But people have returned to the exhibition 2 and 3 times to enjoy the warmth and exuberance of her paintings.
Well, every artist in New Zealand painting has their place, and Eve Page fits into an important area of painting concerned with colour and expressionism. And she may not have led a school of painting, but she certainly has added a set of imagery to New Zealand painting, which would be, all the more perhaps poorer for not having it.
Enthusiasm for Eve's work and affection for her were both very evident at the opening of the 7 Decades exhibition at the Robert McDougall Gallery.
So many people. Oh, well, I'm so glad you could make it tonight, really. It's marvelous, really.
It was a chance for old friends and fellow artists to pay tribute to a remarkable woman.
Just after you wrote to me, and so he must be quite well, you know, to get through to that. Thank you very much.
No, I can say hello.
Evelyn Page has continued to paint until very recently, even though the arthritis that began to affect her in the 1960s has got steadily worse. But if it's made life more difficult, it certainly hasn't diminished the vitality of her work, a vitality that speaks of her enjoyment of life. The 7 Decades exhibition is a celebration of that enjoyment.
It was very kind of Neil Roberts to get so excited about it. Really, I was very flattered. It was a compulsion. I mean, I just had to paint and that was it. There was no way out.
"40 of Evelyn Page's works will tour New Zealand over the next 18 months. At the moment, the exhibition is between venues and will open at the Suter Gallery in Nelson on the 26th of this month. After the break, the hammers, kettles, toasters, and theatrical talents of the front lawn.